now that we have these kind of major boxes in, and we have most of the sort of the containers, right? So we have this container, we have something called a header, I have something called filters, main, footer. Now it's time to add something like those little boxes. And I want to show you how I'm going to add the little purple boxes, because those are kind of a key part of our page. And you can see one of the things that's interesting about them is they are exactly the same size. And they all float, right? They're all going to float next to each other. So because they're exactly the same size, instead of saying div ID for each of the boxes, we're going to do something a little bit different this time. So I'm going to go back to my code. Sorry about that. I want to make it a little bit bigger for you guys. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to put in something called, well, it's going to be a div, just like the other ones, because I still want a box for each one of them. But it's going to say, instead of div ID, right? So instead of div ID, I'm going to say div class equals, and I'm just going to call it shoes, because that tells me that's sort of the shoe box. So instead of using the ID, I'm using class. Now the reason I'm using class, and I always have to remember to close it up, and I'm closing it right here because it has exactly one shoe's worth of information in it. So I have div class equals quotes shoes quotes, and then it has my brand, my price, my rating, my colors, and inside of it will actually have my images in the future. So the reason I'm using class is because then I can reuse it, and all of these boxes can look exactly the same. So instead of having to do shoe 1, shoe 2, shoe 3, which is a lot of work, I can just call it div class equals shoes, because then I can reuse it. If I use ID, IDs are unique. They don't, you can't use multiple IDs on the same page. So I couldn't name it div ID equals shoes and reuse it. I have to use class if I want to reuse that particular style. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to reuse it a couple times. So here we go. Div class equals shoes. Right. And again, under color, I'm going to close up my div. Now, one thing a lot of you remarked upon is why people tab things in. Why is most code tabbed in? One of the reasons code is tabbed in is because if you tab it in, you can make sure you can see if each div is opened and closed. So now that it's tabbed in, you can see here's my opening, here's my closing for this particular div. Same thing for this one. If I tab everything in, I can see, okay, here we go. I have my opening and my closing. Okay, so instead of doing it again and again and again, because it takes a lot of time, I'm just going to copy and paste it 6 more times and get rid of the ones that were already here, so I can just do it quicker. Okay, so that I have 2 boxes already. I'm going to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now I have 8 boxes named shoes. Now if I come over here to my Project 2 CSS, I need to select my shoe box. Now I don't use the pound sign because it's not an ID, it's a class. So I select it using a dot, and I can say dot shoes. Right? So now I have a box called shoes. And again, I can do that thing. I can give it a width. And I need to give it a width. My width is 700. So for 4 of them to fit, I'm going to do 150 pixels. Okay, so 150 pixels, and I'm going to give it a background color of purple so I can match what I was trying to do on my other page. Okay, good. Now, I'll show you what happens. Now we have all these great purple boxes, right? They're all exactly the same because they're all named shoe. And they're the same size, same color, and now I can control them by just typing something different into this little box. Okay, so one thing I want to do is I want to do that position relative thing again and float left, because I want them to float next to each other. I don't want them to actually be on top of each other. So once I put in position, colon relative, float, colon left, if I refresh it, there you have it. There are my 8 little boxes, and they're floating exactly the way I want them to float. Now, to really make this look better, I can start adding margins and padding, and you're going to need to spend a lot of time doing margins and padding. You can also do, if you want to control margins better, you can say margin dash left, margin dash right. So I'm going to do margin dash left, and I'm going to give it 10 pixels. We'll see what that does. Okay, so everything has a good margin there. Now I can do margin dash bottom and give it 10 pixels too. And you can see that's going to separate them out even more. So we're starting to really have the boxes that I'm looking for. To make them really look good, you're going to need to add some padding. And I'm just going to do padding 10 pixels because I want it on all sides. So you can see there is my padding. Now what you'll notice is my padding made them too big, right? They're too big to actually fit in here. And so you can see it's floating down to the next line. So if my padding is too big to fit in there, now I need to decrease my width. So I'm going to make my width a little bit smaller. And now, once I've made my width smaller, so I made my width 120 and I saved it, now they all actually fit. So that's how you make a little gallery, and that's how you use class. You can use class for anything that is going to be styled the same way. So you could use it for customer service and about us. So you could do div class equals footer text or footer lists or something like that. You can use it with anything that is going to look exactly the same. These filters might be a really good example of a way to use boxes that have a class instead of an ID.